Welcome to Eric's Juke Joint, home of Bourbon and Beats. But this is not an episode of Bourbon and Beats. If you've been watching that show, I really appreciate you watching, and it really helps me grow the channel if you can like and subscribe if you've been enjoying that content. But this is going to be a little bit different video. There's something I've been wanting to talk about because I've had it on my mind for a week, but it's not really appropriate for me to dive deep into on an episode of Bourbon and Beats because it won't be quite as fun and lighthearted and interesting to a bigger group of people. So I'll tell you what the topic is going to be, and then if you totally tune out of this video, no hard feelings because it's not going to be for everybody. I want to dive a little deeper into something I mentioned in episode 2 of Bourbon and Beats, and that is the fascinating change in the supply and demand dynamics within the bourbon industry that's ongoing right now. So if that doesn't sound something that's interesting to you, go ahead and find something else cool to watch, and I'll see you next week again on Bourbon and Beats. So I mentioned briefly in episode 2 the struggle that George Dickel Distillery had in their in having extra inventory in their barrel houses, and how the decision they made opened a lot of new doors to them and frankly upped their status within the whiskey world by offering the products that have been aged longer. Some of those products have won awards. It's certainly got the attention of people like me that enjoy whiskey. So that was a really good decision that they made that helped solve a problem. But I wanted to dive a little deeper into that, and at that time didn't think it was appropriate to do, and I got to keep the videos under 15 minutes too, so really couldn't talk about it more then. So I kind of put it out of mind. But then as I was preparing for episode 3, which I should be shooting right now, but I've got to get this off my chest, so I'm going to talk about this topic first. While I was doing my research, I came across a rather fascinating thing that happened earlier this year that I somehow missed. I no longer work in the spirits industry as I once did, so I don't keep my finger on the pulse of the business side of it as much as I used to. So I was shocked to learn that one of the major distilleries has closed their main production facility for the entire year of 2026. Now, they are doing some renovations to that product, to their production facility while it's down. So they're doing something productive during that time and not just completely shutting it down. But they're still shutting it down because they've got too much inventory in their warehouse. In fact, there are more barrels of whiskey in Kentucky barrel houses now than there has ever been before. There's a reason for that. First of all, let's talk about the beginning of my bourbon journey, and then so we can come full circle. When I first got into bourbon, it was a little later in life. Won't go too much into the details, but let's just say I was raised in a real religious family, and I had family members that had substance abuse problems. So for those two reasons, I was pretty well scared to death to drink anything alcoholic for most of my life. But right around age 40 is when I got into bourbon. And so that's been 13 years ago now. And when I first started sipping bourbon on a regular basis, a lot of the brands that I fell in love with were things like W.L. Weller 12 year and Eagle Rare, E.H. Taylor, Old Fitzgerald, that kind of thing. And those bottles over the first year of my bourbon journey started disappearing from shelves, and I could no longer find them. They became allocated because the distilleries were running out of inventory, because a lot of people got into bourbon the same time I did, and it became very trendy for people to order bourbon drinks in bars and restaurants. and to start collecting at home. Because it became very trendy, they ran out of inventory very quickly. And so the way they dealt with that, I talked about how George Dickel dealt with it, which I think was genius. Some of the other distilleries did some things that were not so genius and not so savory. Product that had always carried an age statement on the front of their bottle, aged, let's say, 8 years. All of a sudden, they got a new label and that age statement wasn't there anymore. The reason for that was pretty simple. They were pulling stuff out of the warehouse that was much younger, let's say only 4 years, and selling that. So they're selling what was a little bit of an inferior product to try to keep up with demand. Now, let me clarify when I say inferior product. What's that old saying? Sex, pizza, and rock and roll. When they're good, they're really good. And when they're bad, they're still pretty good. Well, I put bourbon in that category too. When bourbon is really, really good, it's velvety goodness, like a term I've used before. When it's, let's say, entry-level product, it's still pretty good and I'll still sit and sip it with you. So it was inferior product that all of a sudden they're putting on the shelves for the same price, or in some cases even more, for that slightly inferior, less aged product. And that's one thing that happened. The second thing that happened is the allocation process, where some of the more highly sought after labels all of a sudden started being distributed to, well, we won't get into all the details, but let's just say whenever you get something like that happening with supply and demand, it's the rich folks, the people with influence, that end up getting the product, or the states or the distributors, whatever. Whoever's got the most influence gets the product. And so for more reason than one, people like me that love bourbon, for the last decade, we've been kind of getting screwed. It's become difficult to find good product, the stuff on the market. If you don't look for an age statement, you never know what you're getting. It's usually a 4-year product. So the supply and demand ratio has worked in the favor of the distilleries for about a decade. Boy, have I seen some fascinating changes recently. Bottles that I haven't been able to find in the store for most of the last decade are showing up, and I'm seeing them on shelves, and I'm seeing them at the manufacturer suggested retail price rather than the jacked up prices that stores have been trying to sell them for. My son Reese watches the market in Tennessee for me since I no longer live there, and I live in South Carolina now, which is, and the markets for bourbon are totally different in those two states. But Reese watches the local market, and he'll often tell me, "Hey, I found a bottle of W.L. Weller, Dad, but he's trying to get $300 for it." So, no, thank you, I'm not interested. But those types of products have started showing up on the shelves now, and showing up at the $60 to $80 range they should be at. I've seen Eagle Rare recently. Old Fitzgerald 7 has started becoming easy to find at multiple liquor stores here in the Columbia, South Carolina area. So a lot of product is starting to show up again. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Number one, drinking among Americans is at an all-time low in the last 100 years. The last time the percentage of Americans that consume any kind of spirit was this low was 1934. So it's been almost 100 years since it's been this low. And at the same time, let me give this caveat first. This is not a political statement. I don't believe politics and religion belong in bars. And so even if it's my bar, I typically steer away from those topics. Everyone is welcome here. Democrat, Republican, black, white, Asian, Hispanic, gay, straight, different pronouns. Whoever you are, you're welcome here, unless you're a bigot, and then you're not. So that caveat in place, this is not a political statement I'm about to make. But since the U.S. government put tariffs on a lot of products coming into the country, the rest of the world has responded by saying, okay, well, we're not going to buy your products anymore, specifically bourbon. Now, I've seen this firsthand myself, so it's not just a story I'm reading about from a particular source or seeing on a particular news source. So it's not fake news because I've seen it myself. I've made 3 trips to Canada in the last 9 months, and you cannot find American bourbon on the shelves there any longer. Whereas previously on trips I've made to Canada for business, it's been readily available. And so they're simply not buying our whiskey anymore, and they're drinking their own. They're drinking Canadian Club and Crown Royal, and not drinking American bourbon anymore. And the same thing's happened with a lot of other countries in the world. So when you got fewer Americans drinking than ever before, and the rest of the world is kind of putting up the middle finger to our government and saying, you can keep your bourbon, then we're ending up with all this extra inventory. Now, the sad side of that is a lot of good people are going to lose their jobs. People that work at these distilleries, as they shut down for a period of time or slow down production, people are going to be out of work and they're going to lose their jobs. That's the sad part. And I really sympathize with that. And I'm very aware of it. But selfishly, on the good side, we're going to, all of a sudden, as bourbon consumers and bourbon collectors, we're going to be treated with the respect that we've deserved for the last decade by the industry. They've kind of hung us out to dry, screwed us, taken advantage of us, however you want to say it. Now, all of a sudden, we're back in the driver's seat when it comes to supply and demand, and it's going to be real enjoyable for those of us that like to have a wide variety of product to choose from, so that we can compare and contrast, and also have that higher quality product available to us. It's going to be nice to see how things go for the next 4 to 6 years until it's time to see another shift in supply and demand. But who knows where things are going. But in the meantime, enjoy what you can find, and cheers.